Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Smart Talks. I am Elizabeth Smart, and I am with my co-host, Miyo Strong, and today we are fortunate to have Katelyn Brewer with us. She is the CEO and president of the organization Darkness to Light. And just straight out of the gate, Katelyn, I'm thinking probably a lot of people have never heard of Darkness to Light before. And so could you just give a brief overview of who you are and what your goals are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on, Elizabeth and Mia. It's so good to be here today. Darkness to Light we're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. And for 20 years, we have really focused on the adult aspect of child sexual abuse prevention. And you might be like, what does that mean to focus on adults to prevent child sexual abuse? Well, the reality is child sexual abuse or any abuse is actually an adult's responsibility. But a lot of adults don't understand why it's their responsibility. And so 20 years ago, our founders put together a training that helps sort of bring people through the basics 101. What is child sexual abuse? How can I help minimize opportunity? What are the expectations that I should have of myself and the people around me? And so that training over time has been rolled out by about 15,000 facilitators in 50 states and 17 countries. And we're really excited about, expanding into India and some other countries. And I think, honestly, for me, it's been an unbelievable experience. I joined about 4 years ago. Before Darkness Led, I'd done a lot of work in Africa and saw sort of the vulnerability of children in those populations. And so when I joined Darkness to Light, I thought to myself, I have a bleeding heart and I care about all these different causes, but I had never heard of child sexual abuse prevention. And so first of all, I thought, I'm not the president and CEO of the organization. I don't know about this topic. And over the last 4 years, what I've realized is I am the exact adult that Darkness to Light wants to come in contact with. An adult who cares, who is a good citizen, who is an active member of their community, and just equip them with the most basic information, because now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. And so if we create an adult, community in this country and change society to get adults to respect that it's their responsibility to protect children, it's a whole different playing field.
And if you wouldn't mind, could you share just some of that basic information that you are trying to reach adults with?
Absolutely. So, for instance, a lot of people don't understand what the concept of grooming is. Grooming is a really basic concept in the child abuse prevention world. And basically what it means is the person who is trying to inflict harm it typically does so after a long period of getting everyone to trust them. So whether it's the child who trusts them, maybe the child's parents, oh, don't worry about that. I'll drive your kid home from soccer practice. Oh, you need something picked up at the grocery store? I was running to the grocery store too. Let me pick it up. I'll bring it right over to you. All of those things that ingratiate them in the community. That's why you often hear when child sexual abuse perpetrators are brought to light. People are always like, oh, but they were just the nicest person. And that's because they intended to be the nicest person. They wanted you to believe that they were the nicest person so that they could get alone time with the kids that they're trying to hurt.
And so how do you gauge whether a person is just trying to help out, genuinely trying to be a nice person, or do you just kind of have I don't want to say a negative filter on everyone, but I'm a mom. I've got 3 kids. Yeah. My life is a little bit chaotic. I wouldn't expect like my neighbors to pick anything up for me, but there are people in my community who have been like, oh, I know you're so busy. I know you travel a lot. If you ever just need like me to watch your baby for a few minutes, and like they're generally like sweet little old ladies from my community who are offering to help. I've never taken any of them up on it. But the offer's there. And how do you gauge whether, they're just genuinely trying to help out, or whether they are grooming?
So it's not a perfect science, but there's a couple different things that you can pay attention to. One is your gut. If you even have an inkling that maybe it's a little extra, maybe like, everyone offers to help. But if it's consistent and you're like, wow, this person is really trying to, spend a lot of alone time with either me or my kid, or trust your gut. Don't feel guilty because you have suspicions that there might be ulterior motives. The reality of the situation is 90% of children who are sexually abused before the age of 18 are sexually abused by someone they know and trust. So it's not the stranger danger. It's not the candy, in the van. It really is someone, those 10% of instances are the ones we hear about a lot. But it's not what's happening even currently during COVID-19. And so we need to be a little bit more careful about who we let our children be with, even if we do know them and trust them. I think the other thing is people who are perpetrators are rule breakers. And so if there's rules that that are set and standard, a youth serving organization or at a daycare, and they constantly break the small rules and they're like, don't worry about it. Rule breakers will start small and sort of grow in their, overall intentions. And so definitely be, aware of those rule breakers.
That's those 2 points are so interesting. I'm curious, going back to that percentages that you brought up, the 90% happens by somebody that you know and trust. Do you know the breakdowns of in the home and like at the school or church or other areas?
Not necessarily the breakdown of the location, although and I'm going to forget who has this stat, so I apologize, but there are stats from the US government, it might be the Department of Justice, that say 80% of of child sexual abuse actually does happen in a home. It doesn't necessarily mean the child's home, but a home of the trusted individual, et cetera. So 30% of that 90% is abused by a family member. And that typically means a close, immediate family member. And then 60% of that 90% is someone the family knows and trusts. So that could be, similar to what we all are hear about with like the Larry Nassar trial and coaches and teachers and guidance counselors, so those people who some people call like pillars of the community perpetrators, people that you sort of look up to, and you would never expect them to be, the person hurting a child.
Yeah, well, we have got there's always some scandal in the media over a pillar of the community who everyone thought was this incredibly brilliant, creative person. And come to find out, they all have these, I don't even know if it's proper to call it a dark, dirty little secret, because I'm not fully convinced that they're always secrets. I feel like a lot of time people do know about it, they just don't act on it. And that's really
I couldn't agree more.
That really is what kind of gets me, because part of me, I've been a victim of abuse. Thank goodness it wasn't from my family. My captor, Wanda Barzee, one of my captors, was released just a year and a half ago. And in those first couple of weeks that she was released, I just remember thinking, wow, I've been so lucky because I'm not related to them. They don't live in the same community as me. I don't have to see them every day. Like, I know she's now out there and I'm not happy about it, but I know that I don't have to put up with her. What about all of those people, all those victims and children who never even get a modicum of justice? What about all those victims who every night when they go to bed, they lie in their bed and they wonder, oh, is he going to come into bed with me tonight? And I just can't imagine like the fear and the frustration and the anxiety that would cause in a child. And then when you take it to the next level, and we can take the Larry Nassar case just for example. There were people along the way who had complaints reported to them, but they always kind of shoved him aside and said, well, he is the best. No, he would never do that. He is the best. He's this top guy and he would never do that. And come to find out, Like, of course, it's
Not the best
not this
guy.
individual's
Not even
fault.
close.
I mean, it's always the fault of the perpetrator, but I mean, it just breaks my heart to find out that all of these other victims, they didn't have to be victims. They didn't have to be hurt. They didn't have to be touched. They didn't have to be abused in the way that they were.
There's something to be said about the way that we allow the stigma of sex to overshadow our reaction to this topic as adults. We, you know, if you found out that someone who was really popular and very prominent in the community murdered someone, you wouldn't hesitate to pick up the phone and call and report the fact that, you know, coach murdered an athlete. That is, you wouldn't even second guess yourself that needed to be reported. But there's something that happens when it comes to the believability of a young girl who is suffering, and a young boy. Statistically, it's there are less boys, but boys are also unfortunately victims as well. It's hard to believe a child's word, right? Because we as a society don't necessarily place all of our decisions with the child first. So if we found out something and we had the child's rights in mind before we thought about ourselves and our own social isolation and what it might mean to our reputation in society if we say, you know, somebody abused this child, if we thought about the right of the child, we would say, okay, even if I'm wrong, the right of the child is that they have a right to due process. And because they are not legally capable of asserting that themselves, as the adult, I need to, I need to move that forward for them. And once you think about it like that, it becomes so clear what the next step in the action is. There's no doubt in my mind that if I have a hunch that something is happening, I'm going to report it.
It's interesting that you talk about that when you first mentioned if someone were to murder someone, you wouldn't hesitate. And I first want to say, I mean, murder is terrible and awful, and I'm not at all trying to belittle the pain that it causes to the families, to the friends, to the communities. I want to say that first and foremost. You know, it's an awful, heinous crime, but I'm not always convinced that murder is actually worse than rape, because I have met so many victims who they did survive their rape, but they're just surviving. They're not really living. And that is a loss of life right there. And to some degree, I almost feel like it's worse because, I mean, their body is still functioning to some degree. I mean, they're still in it, but they're not actually living their life. And so if you think about it in that terms, I mean, I feel like that kind of sheds new light on it. And you know, victims carry this pain with them throughout the rest of their lives. And as we've seen, so it's so difficult for victims to come forward. And for so many, it is such a, they feel it is such a dark, dirty little secret that they don't want people to know what happened because of that perception that you mentioned. Because there's that question, well, am I going to be believed? It's my word against their word. Why would someone believe me over them? You know, I mean, like I might just be
all
a
the more reason for
girl.
Active bystanders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All the more reason for active bystanders to stand up and do the right thing and report, so that survivor doesn't feel alone. So the weight of their experience, isn't also coupled with the weight of doing the right thing. It's we wouldn't expect other victims of other crimes to do that, particularly when it's a child. I mean, children have yet to form all of those, ways of processing and thinking. And for many of them, they don't even realize, they know it feels wrong, but it's someone that they're supposed to trust. It's someone that, has been deemed a safe person in their life. And so when, interactions happen between the child and the perpetrator, those children then question whether or not they allowed it to happen. Because a lot, child sexual abuse isn't always as violent as rape. It can often be very passive. And so then and bodies react to things. So there's guilt about the fact that my body has reacted to something happening to me that I didn't want to happen. And so you have this innocent kid trying to figure out all of these very, very traumatic and adult oriented feelings. And they're doing it on their own because they're scared to death to tell anyone what has happened to them, because they don't want to get in trouble for letting it happen. So that is why we have to educate kids. We got to give them the right words. We got to let them know, body safety and body boundaries. We have to educate them. But
And
the
as you're
responsibility of prevention. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think probably I was just going to ask you what you were leading into, but as parents, and as parents who, look after children, do you have tips if you suspect something's going on? Are there changes you should be looking for in your child? Are there any, we've talked about red flags of grooming. I'm just wondering if there are red flags to notice in your child, not necessarily like the perpetrator, but in your child, if you can guess whether something or not's going on, or that can help you to figure out whether something or not's going on.
Definitely. So I would say that it's big changes, right? Big and quick changes. So it could go either way. You could have had an, all A student, president of this, captain of the football team, lead cheerleader, whatever stereotype you want to sort of attribute to. And then all of a sudden they sort of, they don't care what they're wearing anymore. Their homework isn't complete. They're, not showing up for practice. They refuse to be around this one certain person. They get really uncomfortable. They get a little bit more moody. And the reason I say that it's normally like a pretty sudden change is because, kids grow and they change and they have moods and, their likes and dislikes. So there's a difference between sort of normal teenage years and the dramatic reaction to a traumatic event that's happening in their lives. And when you're talking to your kids, definitely make sure that you express that you will not be upset if something has already happened, because a lot of kids are really nervous that if they tell, they're going to get in trouble. And so they continue to not tell because of that. But if you do have a conversation, and you should have a conversation with your kids, definitely make sure that it's open and aware that you're not going to be upset no matter what they tell you. And I think the other thing, so it could be the other way. There could be a kid who was kind of C's and, did the homework, but it wasn't really an overachiever, all of a sudden becomes obsessed and everything has to be right, down to their nail polish and the way their makeup is. They have to constantly be perfect because they're trying to fill, that void in themselves, with all of these external, modalities through which to grow through their self-esteem. So I would say big changes. With younger kids, I think it's really important just to have really constant conversations. Talk about penises and vaginas. I often laugh that my family now calls me the penis and vagina lady, because that's all I do is tell people to teach their kids the right body parts. And with that, if you're just constantly asking questions, kids will often just sort of say something, and surprise you with their honesty. So it's just open conversations all the time.
We had listening to you is like bringing me right back to I have a 13-year-old daughter, and when she was in 4th grade, we noticed this behavior shift in her. She was pretty independent and outgoing and self-assured, and all of a sudden she was having like separation anxiety and just wanting to like be with me constantly, which I loved, but it was a little bit concerning. And it was the same thing. It was like, okay, so there's behavior changes. What's happening? Like talking to her. And I've been the penis and vagina lady my whole life as well. But it was interesting because it wasn't us that got her to come forward. But what actually ended up happening was she had a best friend that was in 4th grade with her, and they would have play dates every week. And we found out later that this friend was like locking her in the bathroom with her and forcing her to watch inappropriate content on YouTube, which the mother was a pediatrician, upstanding. Well, you know what I mean? Like, it just was such a shock to me, but it was actually my daughter's close friends that had encouraged her to come forward and talk to me and her dad about it, because she was so riddled with anxiety and it was affecting, I mean, she was still maintaining a level of normalcy, like that maybe if you weren't paying close attention, you couldn't understand what was going on. But her kids actually encouraged her and said, tell your mom, you have to tell your mom. Like, and I'm so proud of those other fourth graders. I mean, that's a really big, responsibility. And she did finally come, and she sat down and I just held her and she was just crying and crying and crying. And it took her forever to tell me, because of the guilt and the shame and the worry. And honestly, because as a parent, I'm such an aggressive, like, I will confront you. I will take you to the cops. I am a no holds barred type parent because of my own experience of being a victim and not having anyone stand up for me. But that actually turned against me. My daughter was really worried I was going to literally go to jail for killing her. And that is a very big, I know you smile, but it like broke my heart when she said that.
But I've heard that so many times. Like, big bear dads who love their kids so much. They're scared. These kids are scared to death because they hear that. If anybody hurts you, I'm going to kill them. Like, I know why adults say it. I know. I mean, it's such a natural sort of protective thing to say. But the unintended consequence of that is that exact fear that your daughter experienced, which
so I've changed. Thank you. And I've changed my verbiage to, instead of like, I will skin them alive and send their body to their grandma type person, I will protect you at all costs, is how I've switched my verbiage, because they were so afraid of me literally going to jail, which I would for them, but it's also not the loving.
They need you outside of the
yes. But so like changing my verbiage has helped a little bit, and just that really positive like reinforcement of her friends and their support, and turning it and being like, see how much you needed those friends. Now you can be that friend when something happens in your personal circle. I'm just so proud of her. I mean, it's been years and years, but she's come so far, and it was just such a pivotal like moment for us. So anyways, that was a long tangent, but
beautiful.
Everything that you're saying hits home, and I hope the other moms and dads that are listening can take some tips and tricks and some ideas from this.
One of the things that I am really interested in is, right now we're all still in lockdown. We're all still just waiting and waiting and waiting. And Miyo and I, we've had many conversations. We've had lots of guests on. We've been talking about how, domestic violence is on the rise, which really is just another name for abuse inside the home, from family. So it's abuse. And as Miyo and I have talked, I mean, whether it's been in a podcast or just, on the phone afterwards, we've been talking about, well, what about these kids who are trapped in the homes? I mean, it's not like they're adults that can just like get up and go. Their situations are significantly different than an adult who's trapped in an abusive relationship. I mean, I'm not belittling what adults go through either. Like, it's a big deal. Abuse on every level is a big deal. It just gets a little bit more complicated when you're a child. And so I'm wondering, you mentioned you guys have a program out right now, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that.
I would love to. So similar to child advocacy centers and other organizations, and you both, as soon as we heard that we were going to be in a shelter in place and a quarantine, my team went into immediate overdrive. you know, what we worried about is coming true, unfortunately, that RAINN has actually seen a massive uptick. In fact, 22% more of minors are calling and reporting through the RAINN hotline. Out of those, they're saying that 67% of those reports are from a family member, or abuse from a family member, and that 79% of the reports are actually a family member currently living with them. And what's worse is that we are finding that the abuse that's reported is both escalating in severity and frequency. So we are talking about an incredibly dire situation for the children in our communities across the country and around the world, quite frankly. And so Darkness to Light's team was like, what are we going to do? You know, obviously prevention looks a little bit different in a crisis. And so we released a 30-minute training. It's free. You just go to the2l.org. It's the first thing that pops up on our website. And it's a free 30-minute training to help you try and put together a little bit of a crisis plan to think through, if you have an abusive family member in the home, what are some ways to like quietly mitigate and diffuse situations. So for instance, minimizing one-on-one uninterruptible time. So do you have camping every night in the family room so that children aren't sleeping alone in their rooms? Do you minimize online time because you know that there's a possibility that perpetrators are, talking to your kids with more frequency because they're online a lot? Do you, constantly keep them busy with activities, cooking, exercising, puzzles, whatever, to try and keep them away from isolated instances, quiet? There is a ton of stress associated with the safe parent in the household, figuring out ways to constantly mitigate, dangerous situations. And there's a heightened propensity for domestic abuse because of that, and so we recognize that. But hopefully the 30-minute training will give you some help in just thinking through some of those small little ways that you can help your family members stay safe as much as possible. And again, I can't say this enough, if you know of someone, if you're a teacher and you had suspicions that a child was being hurt when they were in school, now is the time to report it. Please report, because if you had a suspicion, it's probably legitimate, and those kids are being, tortured every day. So that's, for us, that's a really important. There's tons of blogs. We have a blog for teachers. We have a blog around help, like picking the right childcare. A lot of parents are feeling forced into finding like random ways to keep their kids, entertained and taken care of while they're working. So yeah, that's pretty much what the training is about. Free, 30 minutes. And we do have a safety exit button on the top of our website. So if you are on the website and you need to quickly exit, you can make sure. I don't want anyone to feel unsafe visiting the website.
And that is d2l.org.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're also on Instagram and
I am.
And Facebook, I think.
We are on Facebook. Yep. So Darkness to Lights is D2L.org on Instagram, and then I think it's Darkness #2 Light on Facebook.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me on today. The work you do at your foundation, Elizabeth, is just breathtaking, and through collaboration, I believe that we're all going to get to the mission that we're trying to achieve. So thank you. Keep up the good work.
So. And to everyone watching today, we've been given some great, just easy things to look out for. As far as like grooming goes, I know we only brushed shortly on a couple of topics because we can't keep you captive forever, unfortunately. But make sure you just pay attention. Trust your gut first and foremost. If you feel like something's wrong, then trust your gut. I mean, I always say you will never regret going the extra mile to check on your kids. You'll never regret being a little bit extra paranoid to make sure they're safe, but you might regret not being. So trust yourself, trust your instincts, make sure you're talking with your kids. Go take this 30-minute safety training on the d2l.org website. Like she said, it's only 30 minutes. That is, that's probably shorter than this podcast. And it gives you some good information, help come up with a plan. There are so many resources available to you right now that are 24/7 hotlines. Make sure you call, whether you're inside the United States or outside of the United States. You don't have to go through this alone. You do have resources available to you. Don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid. We are all here to help you, and keep going. Don't give up. Life is worth living. Life can get better, and it will get better. And with that being said, thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of Smart Talks. We appreciate you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.